Right. Well, this is fun. Oh, now I can't hear you.
Can't hear me now?
Oh, I hear you now. Okay.
All right.
Are you at home?
Yeah, so I'm home for the Friday. I go to work most Fridays, but I don't teach on Fridays. I just have some break time right now in the semester, and I'm working on some other stuff. And this idea came up where I was like, I should talk to Paul about some things that have been on my mind about the Kanye situation and how it relates to that we haven't spoken about Jordan Peterson's Rehab in your channel or much at all. And it's kind of been almost a wake up call for Kanye to say, look, there's something huge happening in my life, and I want to tell everybody about it. Something that's groundbreaking and changing. And yet, what we're hearing from Dr. Peterson in a similar vein is there's something huge happening in my life. We're not going to talk about it. We're going to wait for it. Now, what's more impactful? Somebody who has, say, a radical change in their life about an existential thing, a soteriological conclusion about their saving grace through faith in Christ, or somebody that comes off of Klonopin in a bad way. And our culture isn't ready for somebody to say, this is a radical change in my life, and you're going to see radically different things from me, especially when we've come to sort of expect certain things from these famous people. I know Kanye and Jordan Peterson are very different people, but what's amazing to me is they have a similar impact on people in this. You don't know what about them is affecting you. It's very mysterious the way that Kanye affects people, the way his music, his styles, his brands, his clothing, just his fame in general. And it's also very interesting that people have a hard time pinpointing what it is about Jordan Peterson that is affecting them. And oftentimes what we do with that when something's mysterious and something's difficult for us to think about for ourselves, I mean, what I do a lot, and I also see this in other people, is that we tend to avoid talking about those things. We don't want to think about something that is difficult if it causes my version of me to have to be reevaluated. For example, if I'm, say, a Christian going along thinking Hollywood's bad, movies and music are all bad, and yet somebody comes and says, hey, my life has changed through Christ, now I must change what I was doing in that vein and switch it up. That would require for me, or call forth from me, effort to assess in my life if there was an area where I was not doing the same. And this is very difficult for us. We don't like to be self-critical. Actually, no, that's not true. Some of us don't like, most people don't like to be self-critical because it hurts. You know, I heard you talking to, I think it was Adam Friended, and you said, I'm a racist. And how easily you said that and how truthful it was a real reason why a lot of people understand that when they're talking to you, they're getting exactly who you are. And there's no facade there, that it's actually you. And this is something that challenges our own versions of ourselves. It challenges who we think we are or who we're presenting ourselves to be in front of everyone else. And Kanye is forcing us to consider that a radical change in his life could have actual fruit. Jordan Peterson, on the other hand, has made people consider their lives and what to change about their lives, but we don't know why. We don't know why they should, and it's wrapped in a mysterious sort of, you know, soldier up or bucko up, or, you know, be a better lobster or more competitive or clean your room. But we don't know why. The why is missing from Jordan Peterson. And we've talked a lot about how he consistently keeps people at bay with regard to his metaphysical beliefs about God, about Jesus, about the resurrection. And he reminds me of the complaints that were levied at the presidential candidate, John Kerry, being a flip-flopper, because in some interviews he says something that is pretty clear that he believes one thing, and in another vein or in another situation he says something else. I find that incredibly relatable. But what I don't think people understand about that is that you can change your mind. And when you do change your mind, you should change what it is you're saying or how you're behaving. Something that William James wrote in one of his books, I don't remember if it was his classic about general psychology, but it was that beliefs are rules for action. And this goes along the lines of sort of in the New Testament in James, where he says, faith without works is dead. Kind of like that, which is like to say, okay, if you believe something, you would act upon it. It is the boundaries by which you would act. If you don't believe in it, or if you're acting in a different way, it's almost as if you don't believe the thing that you're saying you believe. That contrasts with more of a Kanye's version of, I believe, help me in my unbelief. Like, he's full into it. He's bought in, he's sold completely into this, and yet he doesn't have a nuanced understanding of it. For example, I heard an interview between one pastor in Arizona and the pastor who is at the church Kanye started going to. And he said, what Kanye is doing in the Sunday service is not church, right? And that kind of, it brought up for me something that was like, oh man, here's the establishment church again, coming in to mess with what the Spirit's doing, right? To try and control it or put boundaries around it. And instead, not learning from the experience of somebody who's had a resurrecting experience, who's been brought back to life through Christ, they're not seeing that. They are trying to control it. And this is, again, why I referenced to you in my email, the C.S. Lewis to Aslan, right? The perspective that we have on religion being able to connect with God in a way that we want to, or that we want to be transformed by the renewing of our minds in only the right way. We're trying to grasp something so powerful and above us and transformative of us that we're bound to fail at it. Anyway, I know that that's a lot, and I've been talking the whole time, but I'm curious about your thoughts on Kanye West and his conversion and the Sunday service, and whether or not, let's say you were he was a parishioner in your church, and he said, Paul, I want to start another church, and I'm going to call it church, and I'm going to do this Sunday service where we sing praise, worship music, we get together, and the gospel is preached. Would you say to Kanye, yeah, that's church, buddy?
Yes and no. So I saw the first part of that conversation between Kanye's pastor, as he's being called, and this apologetics channel out of Arizona. And I didn't know who any of these people were, but by the way they started that video, I knew who exactly those people were, because they opened it up with it was their dog sniffing. They were sniffing each other's butts.
Hey, before we start this, Paul, what is your only comfort?
That I am not my own, baby. but that's right. And I hadn't watched far. I got a little ways into that video. It was like, because, and so growing up when and where I did, I saw and knew drug addicts who stumbled into very tightly reformed communities. And first of all, it was just like this, because that you've got, if you listen to Kanye, just imagine, you and I, you and I are older, but give you and I unlimited money, unlimited freedom, and watch us wreck our lives, and we should know better. And so, and I think this is a way in which, in a sense, Jordan Peterson's last 2 years have a bearing on this, because give somebody unlimited fame, money, opportunity. Jordan's wife traveled with him everywhere they went. And that was a very wise thing, because, and that speaks a lot about the bond that those two clearly have and the strength of their relationship, which is a wonderful thing. But you can completely understand Kanye in terms of everything that he's lived his life. And now he has a child, and this happens predictably. Either people find a way to get a hold of themselves, or they are going to continue to destroy themselves, their relationship, and everything in their life by virtue of the life that they're living. So here Kanye attaches himself to.
I don't need money to do that.
That's right. Yeah, I do it. I do it just fine in small ways on my own. but so then he grabs onto a segment of the church that is about as doctrinaire, rigid, and locked down as you can be. Now, again, I'm not criticizing these people for their doctrine, because theologically, I'm their cousin. So, but so, and that makes perfect sense that Kanye would be looking for something that is going to be like this. But then it's sort of, but then how do you continue to be together? And that's when these comments like, well, he's not really doing church. And I think it's a fair conversation to ask, well, what is Kanye doing?
Yeah.
And I think it's clear that Kanye is sort of doing church for his family and his daughter, which I think is a beautiful thing. Part of the difficulty that Kanye has is, again, because of his fame, it's really hard for him to go to church like normal people.
Like Freddie. He can't go to church anymore. He's famous now.
That's right. So is he doing church? Yes. But the reason why I would have a pause in that isn't because of kind of the rigid. Sorry. Oh, that's okay. I don't think quite for the same reason as these guys. I think for the reason that church is a church. I think Kanye's doing chapel because
okay.
Because chapel is more, like say a college does chapel, it's framed. And because of Kanye's wealth and status and fame, that's sort of framing this. And so that's what I think Kanye is doing. He's doing chapel because church is far less centered around a person or an institution. Church is much more the fruit of a community, and Kanye's Sunday service is sort of the chapel within the frame of the phenomenon that is Kanye and everything that goes around it.
Do you think it's a disruptive factor in sort of the organized church? Different denominations have different rules and follow different conferences and do different sort of liturgy. Is he being disruptive in the putting a ding in the Christian universe of saying, doesn't matter where you are, let's get together and sing praise and worship together? And
no, I don't think this is disruptive. I think this is a gift from God.
What I meant is disruptive in the division, disrupting the divisions of the church and going back to.
Oh yeah, it's doing that.
The Holy See Catholic Church, like the Little C Catholic Church of all believers of all time. We've been in our art in an artifice been divided through denominational capacities and changes or different structures. But this is a unification that here's a tradition. Some churches do infant baptism, some do adult baptism. People have been killed over that. But no church I know of says, we shouldn't sing praises to God. No church I've ever heard of goes, what, let's not do any of that worship. And so what he's doing is a unification, but it is disruptive in its nature because it's going to be in a competitive way with what people are experiencing in their church if they supplant one for the other.
Yeah, I think it's disruptive in a good way. And I think, so one of the things that I haven't been able to sort of get into my videos and that I've been working on is, so I've been, so Tom Holland and his book has come down, and Tom's observation is really important, is that, if you're in the West in terms of, generally speaking, in this moral framework that sort of defines the moral values between, of Western society, that's Christian. So Christendom continues in this format. And I think actually Kanye's service fits into that. So Brad Pitt, I don't know, Google algorithm, pulls up stuff for me that, because I'd done, a Brad Pitt movie recently that probably brought that up. So there's an interview with Brad Pitt. Apparently he went to one of Kanye's early Sunday services, and, so what was that like? And, Kanye makes sort of humanistic, ideas about, but Kanye is reaching out to people like Brad Pitt and saying, here Kanye comes taking a lot of just really conservative tropes from the Black church and musical standards that have been in the Black church forever, and just kind of putting them out there. And everybody's just sort of shocked. And I love the way you framed it as you opened this. Everyone's sort of shocked and not knowing what to do about it, because how could this guy who has been a little crazy, sort of, Jonathan Peugeot upside down clown character, but now coming out and making church the coolest, hippest thing you could imagine. Well, what do you do with that then? And I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, Peugeot's video was wonderfully set for everybody to consider what's happening in terms of it. And I think the labeling of the fool, that Jonathan didn't hide away from labeling it the fool. We have a bad connotation of the fool, and I think he really built up structurally, mythologically, why the fool is that disruptive force and what it is meant for, right? And that the fool was that classic one that could joke in front of the king, the one that could hint, hey, king, emperor, you have no clothes, and hey, everyone's funny, whereas it's not as socially uncouth for the joker to do it. And this is a tradition in, I forget where, but it's an African mythology, and the story about the two farmers, and the sort of the juxtaposed Loki character. He has the sun on one side of his head and the moon on the other, and he walks between two neighbor farmers, and they go, wow, there's the sun god, and then the other farmer goes, wow, there's the moon god, and then at night he does the other, and walks by him, and so these guys get together. They say, hey, my experience was I saw the sun god in the morning, and the other farmer goes, no, it was the moon god. And then they argue about it, and what it creates is tension. And this is somewhat of what people are going to see and understand about Kanye's conversion, what it means to him, how his behaviors are now the rules for his, or how his beliefs are now the rules for his behaviors. They're going to be contentious about that, and it can go a bad way. Disruption can go a bad way if people are dismissive of thinking something new or beginning to attempt to think something new, and they get too rigidly dogmatic into sort of nailing what it is. And I think Jonathan Peugeot was so instructive in being able to say, we don't know what this is. And he has these words that sound a little bit squeamish to me of like, let's be aware, let's pay attention, but those are absolutely great instructions instead of make a decision about this and know what it is and then act on it right now.
Right.
We're bound to be wrong in whichever way we do that. And I think that's one of the key insights that he's providing us with, which is this represents a cultural shift. This is a meta meme, if you will, which is, it is culturally disruptive, yet it's a hearkening back or a reemergence of a standard, a truth, something that's been held over the centuries of Christendom, or you say, as you're saying, Tom Holland sort of puts it, that all Occidental stuff is Christian stuff. That it's a standard that is being uncovered now through this disruptive Kanye experience. And Jordan Peterson was doing that intellectually, if you will, but then touching on what needed to happen in the spiritual realm that Kanye is sort of the leader for right now, which is this reemergence of Christian faith in changing people's lives and moving them towards a meaningful, purposeful life that is to emulate their Savior and to trust not in themselves, but to trust in the saving grace of Christ and his death and resurrection. This is Peterson couldn't point to that. As you called him, he said Jesus' name, but the disciples were right in a sense that he was not of that group.
Right.
Now how God uses him, we don't know. But obviously, in whatever sense you understand that term, God using somebody, this is a human experience of shifting winds. And when Jonathan Pageau tells us to be aware, to pay attention to this, what he's really saying is this is hearkening to something that's bigger, that's going to be more radical, and that this is something that might be an emergent property. This might be something that is coming new that we haven't seen yet, and that's an exciting and terrifying thing. I do want to warn against, and this is perhaps a personal issue that I have, where I realized at a very early age that all generations think their generation is the last generation, and specifically in a, as you called my church, an evangelical church growing up, there was this, hellfire and brimstone tribulation. Are you a pre-trib or a post-trib person? All this sort of work that had very little value in terms of being able to be transformed by Christ, to be a servant of Christ. Almost none of that has any bearing on the actuality of a Christian life when you speculate on end times and that type of, I forget the dude, Tim LaHaye, that's who it was, who wrote these, Fear and Loathing in the Tribulation, or whatever his book was. I hope that Pageau's admonishments to pay attention don't hearken that this is just another iteration. This is just another group of people experiencing Christ's work 2,000 years ago that still has ripple effect through time in a new way through this exposure. But I'm just saying that I'm somewhat sensitive to those tribulation watchers, all the Millerites out there. I'm not a fan of you. I have nothing against the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Not like I love them too.
Well, I like how when you opened this up, you talked about, so the things we talk about and the things we don't talk about. And I haven't talked much about, first of all, I was a little bit annoyed at the word choice. I think it was unintentional, but the word choice of rehab for what was described for Peterson, because when you hear that word, it launches the conversation down a certain road. And it sets up a narrative that, Peterson somehow, there's a moral valence to the story that even just on the technical side of it isn't quite correct because of now we talked a little bit about this at the meetup. Why don't you, we didn't introduce you at the beginning of this. This is my friend. This is my other friend, Dr. Jim. This is Dr. James, and he teaches at a local community college. And now, can you describe a little bit about the kind of drug that Peterson was on and why that drug is sometimes taken for anxiety, and a little bit of maybe what anxiety is and what the drug is supposed to do for something like that?
Sure. The drug that I again have no personal experience with Dr. Peterson or who is prescribing him stuff. And I also have a bent against the use of psychiatric medication. So I want to make that totally clear to people. My bent is that we don't have research that purports that they are sufficient to treat the conditions that we're talking about. They do, however, cover over symptoms. And I think you should think of them as palliative. Like when people are dying, we give them morphine, not because it cures them, but because it eases their suffering. So I don't think that there's no place for psychiatric medication. I think that our use of it is grotesquely overused and over-relied upon. The drug that he was using is called Klonopin, is what people would hear it as, but clorazepam is its technical name. And it was a drug that was used mostly and developed to fight epileptic seizures. So epileptic seizures is basically when all the neurons in your brain begin to synchronistically fire. A whole bunch of different types of seizure disorders called epilepsy. And we treat them with a central nervous system depressant, like, say, Klonopin. A lot of drugs are anti-epileptic drugs that are used not for epilepsy. In fact, Klonopin is not a really great AED or anti-epileptic drug. It doesn't really help a lot of people. That's not like a go-to first line of treatment if you develop epilepsy, that your doctor would be like, oh, try Klonopin. It does have effects, and it has helped people with panic disorder. So that's one of the treatment uses for Klonopin, and that is an anxiety disorder, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. And it's this intense, basically an intense sense of you fear you're about to die. And if you've ever thought of that, if you've ever had a near brush with death, your entire central nervous system is on fire, or what we call your sympathetic nervous system is firing. Everything, you shut down digestive processes, your stomach's not worried about getting your next food because you're encountering death. And people experience panic disorder, which means, they're not like falling off a cliff. They're just walking down the street and they experience this feeling as though they were going to die. And it's been used in treatment of that. In panic disorder is also like, you want to have something that works pretty quick because these people are suffering this intense feeling. So it may have been panic disorder. But the issue that I have with it, and this is something that any physician who's prescribing to Dr. Peterson Klonopin is going to know, that basically the number one psychiatric side effect of withdrawal from Klonopin is depression. It's pretty clearly like that's what happens. It's not that everybody who takes Klonopin experiences depression when they come off of it, but it's the most common side effect for Klonopin. And so I'm not sure if what happened wasn't the treatment coming off the Klonopin was so bad, or if it was the resultant side effect, or what we call iatrogenic effect, that is the doctor-induced effect of prescribing Klonopin, was that he re-experienced depression. And I mean, this is somebody who we know has experienced depression, and man, that would be tough when depression just it eats away at somebody's the joie de vivre, the very literal life force. And he's somebody who was so active and so busy and so important and so out there socially, which is just also very tiring to be depressed. And that maybe what's going on is that he's needing a break to recover and to rejuvenate and to do that. Now, we speculated at our meetup some things that are, we talk at our meetup sometimes about things that are maybe takes we just want to try out. And so I'm not going to trot out all these ideas that people had about Peterson's meetups here, because they were sort of us thinking through, well, what might we do then? And they're not necessarily my take on Peterson. But I thought one interesting thing is that even if, let's say this is a time for him to come off Klonopin, he should, by the way, if any reasonable anybody should be able to get him off Klonopin by now. So clearly what's happening is he's in the phase of recovery, right? So it's not like an acute medical crisis where you got to bring him down and do something else. He's clearly off of it. And so our meetup group kind of speculated, a lot of speculation about like, well, what is he going to use this time for? And might it be that he's focused on writing his next book? Might it be that he's, some of us might hope that he's preparing his Exodus lecture.
I hope so. I really want to hear what he has to say.
I actually want to hear what you have to say. I think you should beat him to the punch. I think you should do some Exodus teaching. I think it'd be great. I really do. And I'm pretty sure that he's at least healthy by now, but those effects of depression, for somebody who's experienced that before, if he's gotten into this depressive system, he is going to have experience with his depression, and each person's depression takes a different trajectory and has different prognosis. So we don't really know what that is, and he hasn't shared it, which again, this is his private medical experiences. So you don't necessarily, we don't really have a right to know this about Dr. Peterson, and it's somewhat, fanboy to like speculate about all this. So I do want to remark that we should be careful in making speculations or sharing that type of thing. It's okay to have ideas and to try them out, but also recognize you might be wrong and you don't know what's going on in his life. Right. This also is kind of where we are with Kanye, because we don't know what's going on in his life, and that makes us speculate. And that's what everybody's kind of doing in the media, is speculating.
Well, and I hadn't really thought of these two things together, putting them together like you did here, but as I said a little bit before, when in our meetup, and I talked about this, I said people should. So I'm a pastor, and I spend time watching people and talking to people about their lives and when new things happen in their lives, so on and so forth. People should have some appreciation for what Jordan Peterson has been through between October 2016 and now. So you have a guy who was a successful academic who, obviously a very high energy person, a very successful scholar who had, been on Canadian public TV regularly for a variety of things over the years, kind of a favorite professor in the university. But when C16 hit and the media grabbed a hold of his, his resistance to that, I mean, his life started a trajectory that none of us are really equipped for emotionally to deal with, because very quickly there were people at his university who wanted to, affect his job and get him kicked out. So that's a crisis. That'd be a crisis for any of us. It's a crisis on multiple layers. Socially, these are your colleagues. Financially, this is your welfare. And then there's a rush of Patreon money that suddenly he's getting, 40, 50, 60, $100,000 a month. And then he releases a book, and the book sells like crazy. And so he's getting, millions of dollars in from book royalties. And then he starts a book tour, which is not a normal book tour. And for the next year and a half, hits over 160 cities. And he's speaking almost nightly off the cuff with ideas. And then he's meeting people afterwards and doing questions and answers afterwards. And he's managing his long history of depression by eating beef and salt and drinking water. And then his wife gets very deathly ill and he almost loses her. And then there's sort of a, that whole thing resolves itself. I mean, if you think about what that does to a human being, okay? Now, we watch them on screens and all of this stuff, but we know human beings. We're human beings, and we live with human beings. When all that stuff hits a human being, I mean, that is even more, that is along the lines of what happens when a 19-year-old gets handed a multi-million-dollar NFL or NBA contract. Now, Jordan Peterson
contract from Jay-Z.
What's that?
Or recording music contract from Jay-Z.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now Jordan Peterson's in his 50s. So in a certain sense, the cake is baked. But that doesn't mean that all of this stuff that hits him isn't going to just, I mean, if you watch that Rise movie that people are protesting for no reason at all, because I've seen the movie. There's nothing, there's no scandal there. And in fact, those people who are protesting are blessing the producers because they're doing the promotion for them. But if you watch that movie, Tammy sits down in that movie and basically says, in some ways we kind of lost Jordan because of, all of this stuff, even though she's traveling with him. So this is the guy's life. And after this 2.5 years for him, he needs time off away from the spotlight. And he more than has it well-deserved, but I think it's really interesting the way you framed it initially, so on one hand, we don't, and on my channel, I did not want to go and speculate and be a pundit about, because I have no idea. No idea. All I know is what everyone else knows publicly.
Yeah.
But you're noting the silence, and is to me interesting because
So here's my idea about it, is that Kanye goes into rehab and TMZ follows him and is hounding him and is crushing him, and he goes into rehab 2.5 years ago and is devastated for whatever reason. In fact, I think he had a Sacramento concert right up here, and it was like right around the time of the Jordan Peterson conference here in Sacramento. And Kanye went out there and I guess a couple of my friends were there, and they said he basically started talking, didn't sing any songs.
That's right. I remember that now.
Off stage, and then they got their money back or something. Like there was almost a riot at this place. This is right around the opening of the Golden One Center, right? This is like
Yep.
Our big new arena in town, and it was a devastating concert for him. He goes right back into rehab, and what happens is 2 years later he reemerges as this thing, right? But all that fame, all that money, all that influence, all the marrying the celebrity and all this stuff, he needed a break. And that break, what emerged from him is a reflection of his true self and understanding that he needs Christ, right? It's very clear that he's kind of there right now. What I'm asking is there a similarity of, okay, yeah, Jordan Peterson is obviously an older man, more experienced than Kanye, who now has this incredible experience of, you call it his rocket status,
Status rocket.
Status rocket, that's what it is. And that he goes up so far that he now needs a rehab break. But what's going to emerge from Jordan Peterson? Is it going to be him like Kanye, not at all a facade, legitimately what's happening with him? And is it going to be where, and I think this is the other similarity I saw, because I was watching an interview with Kanye in which he could not say, this is an absolute mark of maturity. He couldn't say, I don't know. And in faith, at least in my faith, that's the most freeing thing possible, is to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't need faith. And Jordan Peterson is another guy who we really respect, but I think in a public way, and I don't know if he does this intentionally. I know as an academician you have to learn this trait, is to say, I don't know. In fact, that's what instigates inquiry, is not knowing. And so I wonder if what's coming out of this for Dr. Peterson is going to be letting go of some of that control over what he thought he knew and was presenting. And this is, again, like Kanye, letting go of what he was controlling and presenting for his music. And what happens is God is made manifest in people's lives through what these two men are doing. And neither of them set out to do this.
Yeah. I too am, I have no idea what, will Jordan finish his book? I think he will. Will he do an Exodus series? When he comes, will his next book be any good? I have no idea. Will he try and do another book tour, and will it not have the same sizzle as the first one? I mean, we just don't know any of these things. I think it will be interesting, because at some point, I mean, Jordan, after you've been on the journey that Jordan has for the last 2.5 years, and you get some quiet time, you start doing some sums, you start reflecting, and you start evaluating the choices that you made over the last 2.5 years. Maybe you make some new ones, maybe you decide to double down, maybe just continue, whatever. But Jordan is also an enormously transparent person, as is Kanye. So I've watched a bunch of Kanye interviews recently, and I'm struck by how intuitive he is and how transparent he is, and maintaining that transparency in the kind of fishbowl in which he lives. Because, I've never watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I have absolutely zero interest in it. But his wife and her family, I mean, this woman became famous for nothing more than being famous. I mean, it's just, and so his wife has a long running TV show that is nothing more than voyeuristic interest into their extended family.
Yeah.
And again, if someone would come to my church and say, "Oh, hi, how are you? Fine. What do you do for a living?" I make my career being famous for no other reason that I don't sing, maybe I look pretty, but my whole career is just being famous, and I have a 10-year TV show that is nothing but a voyeuristic look at my extended family. As a pastor, I'd be like, heaven forbid this would happen to anyone I know and love.
Yeah.
But that's what he married into. And Jordan, you know, that movie Rise, I was, you know, it was quite, Jordan has welcomed cameras into his house regularly. Rebel Wisdom, a whole bunch of interviews, Vice, maybe shouldn't have let that one in. And then the people that did the Rise movie. And so he's also been transparent, and on stage, you know, when his wife was in serious condition, and he, you know, he broke down regularly during, you know, the very many public presentations that he made. So yeah, I and it's interesting because I think that in our culture right now, and you and I are doing it right now, we're talking on YouTube, or we're going to post this on YouTube probably.
And I'm in my house, and you're in a house of worship. Like,
that's right.
We're inviting cameras into our home somewhat.
Yeah, but you know, it's, if you read N.T. Wright's book, Biography of the Apostle Paul, I don't know if you've looked at that book at all.
I did. I listened to his audiobook. I loved it so much.
Yeah. It's a wonderful book if you want to get some orientation into the world of the New Testament and the Apostle Paul. But one of the things that N.T. Wright makes plain up front is that our notion of privacy, which is so built into our world so deeply, and this privacy which affords, I mean, we've been doing a lot of talk about Joker and masks, you know. Masks are a way to have privacy when you're in public. That wasn't, I mean, you go and you look at Roman architecture, and it's like, where are the walls?
Well, I mean, Roman God, Janus, is the two-faced God.
Yeah.
I mean, he's truly the two-faced God of and this is, again, sort of Jordan Peterson-esque, that has a yin-yang sort of, or more of a Mesopotamian Asher and Kisher. I think they're the male and female creative and destructive gods. So Janus, the Roman thing, there you go.
But so we're, in our culture right now, we're playing with this privacy thing. And so we have these stars that we navigate by. They're in our pantheon. We have these stars that are living in public. And of course, people are mirroring, you know, certainly mirroring their desires, mirroring their habits. I mean, there's a reason we call them stars. It's because culturally we navigate by them. And it's just fascinating. And I think you're exactly right that, you know, Jordan Peterson and now Kanye, these are important ways, telltales, and I think Jonathan Peugeot is as good on this stuff as anyone, in terms of saying, you want to know what's happening? Watch. Look at the stars. They're moving. What's happening? And I do think that Kanye's Sunday services are in a sense, they are Hollywood chapel, but they're also personal family chapel. And that aspect of it, I don't think can be overlooked, because what Kanye has been very open with, you know, here's a guy who has enormous amounts of resources, not just in terms of money, but networking and everything. So he can get Kenny G to come and play sax. You know, when's the last time you heard Kenny G play at Living Stones? We have Freddie G rapping at Living Stones, but we don't have Kenny G playing at Living Stones. So, but, you know, so this is what Kanye can put on. But of course, this is also, you know, obviously getting out there via YouTube and other things. And he's done an IMAX movie. And so this is chapel for the stars in some ways. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm watching with fascination, like, no, but do I think this is a movement of God? Absolutely. Do I have any idea where it's all going to go? I have no idea. But it's important to remember. So I talked to a friend of Freddie's that we used to go out to lunch with. He didn't want to be on the show because he's a pretty shy guy. But, you know, so I was talking to him about this because he pays a lot of attention to this kind of stuff. And I said, you know, tell me about what you think about Kanye. and this guy's African American, so we talked about it a little bit. And actually, before I picked him up, because we went out to lunch, I was listening to Bob Dylan's Christian albums in his Christian phase, and Freddie's friend mentioned Al Green. So if you YouTube Google Al Green,
the Reverend Al Green,
and because look, I had just, as I'd mentioned at the meetup, I had people are going to think horribly of me for this, but I just watched Dolomite on Netflix, and because for me, the movie Dolomite, that was just like Joker put me in touch with 1978 New York City, Dolomite put me in touch with 1975 Paterson, New Jersey. And so, to understand the Black community and all of its complexities, all the way back to, the slave passage, and so on one hand you got Dolomite, and on the other hand you got the Black church, and these are archetypes within. You got Flip Wilson's Church of What's Happening Now. Search for that on YouTube. And so what's happening with Kanye is so authentically Black and American and Christian that if you have any understanding of the story and the history of the Black church in America, it's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep.
And of course, to understand, and I really, anybody who's trying to figure out, what to think about Black Lives Matter, the conversations going on in the Black community today, there's an award-winning biography of Malcolm X that I think is required reading, and it's on Audible too, because if you look at the story of Malcolm X, one of his nicknames, Detroit Red, you look at that story and you begin to understand what's going on beneath the surface in the African American experience. And so I think we're watching history with this stuff, and I think you're exactly right. We don't know how to interpret it, but we shouldn't be too fast to interpret it. We have to talk about it and process it together, but we by no means can make definitive judgments on them.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you missed out was, don't forget Johnny Cash also very much had gospel, and Elvis Presley also very much had gospel as part of their popularity, part of a mixture in when they got tired of the music they were doing, they mixed in that. It remains to be seen if Kanye is going to produce solely music that he sees as service to God, or if he is going to produce popular music again. And sort of in a related vein, is Jordan Peterson going to produce meaningful academic intellectual content, or is he going to trot out the same old tropes that we all got, or B, is he going to go mainstream with that Dr. Oz, as we've discussed before, which I'm not dismissing his Dr. Oz appearance. I think it was the best succinct presentation of what he talks about in all of his stuff, but I'm just saying Dr. Oz is sort of for the masses rather than to bring a challenge to people from an intellectual, spiritual, personal standpoint.
Yeah. And I could imagine Kanye having Jordan offer a sermon at a Kanye Sunday service. I could see it. I could see it, because we know Kanye was watching
around that church. We are acting as if this is church.
Oh, and I love how you put in, one of the things that both Kanye and Jordan, they moved people in ways that I don't think neither the mover or the movie really understood. And, so I grabbed, on my blog, I post links when something happens that I think I might want to go back to, but it was just, where was I? Complaints about Kanye and on. Oh yeah. In off of Reddit. I know this sounds insane, but I think I just got saved thanks to Kanye West. I don't know where to go from here. And I read that and I thought, oh no, It's starting again. Because that was the Jordan Peterson thing.
Okay, but we're also smart enough and nuanced enough to know that that type of conversion might not be what those people think it is, and that following Christ isn't, it's like marriage. Sure, there's a wedding day. Like, yeah, there's an actual day on which the day before that you were not married and now you are, but that wedding is almost unimportant. It's a daily commitment to a relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why I think you might have some anxiety for folks on Reddit who are claiming that they found Christ, because you know how powerful and how important that you put your faith in Christ, and how difficult it is, and all the suffering. You know, if you love me, the world will hate you, is what Christ tells us. That's not something you'd wish on somebody if that person hadn't made us right with God. So it's a very complex issue. And the emotions I have about excitement for another brother in Christ in Kanye, my prayers for the ministries of these, as you labeled them, the unauthorized
Exorcists.
It's wonderful and complex to watch. It really is.
Well, and Kanye is an authorized exorcist. He's doing it in Jesus' name. He's not bashful about it at all. But he's outside, so his pastor kind of says, well, it's not really church. It's so funny because my former pastor, Dante Venegas, grew up, he's Puerto Rican background, grew up in New York City.
I thought you only had two pastors, your dad and then that one other guy.
What's that?
I thought you only had two pastors.
My father, but then in Grand Rapids, Michigan, it was Dave Beelan and Dante Venegas.
Okay, so
they were co-pastors of my church. And so Dante knew my father because Dante had grown up in New York City in Spanish Harlem, and then got into trouble with the law and drugs and all that stuff, and then went into the Manhattan Christian Reformed Church, which had a very interesting history. Opened up, similar to Kanye in this, so opens up the Psalter hymnal in the back, reads the Heidelberg Catechism, and says, I need more of this. So he becomes a minister in the Christian Reformed Church, but not like most of the ministers in the Christian Reformed Church. And so he was my minister in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I remember him praying over me at my ordination and praying that I would lead many people to Christ. And I still remember that prayer that he offered over me at that time. And so I remember him telling me too, he says, yeah, every time someone comes to me and they say, well, they want to be a Christian, I usually try to talk them out of it. I'm like, well, why do you try to talk them out of it? He's like, because, it's rough. And I don't want them just kind of coming in thinking it's going to solve stuff and be easy. I want to be sure. I want to be sure that they're committed before I start taking them seriously, because I always try to talk them out of it. That was Dante. There's actually a biography that someone had written about Dante that you can find on Amazon. He was a really special guy. But I'll never forget that, because whenever someone comes, says they're turning their life over to Jesus, I try to talk them out of it. So that's why I read that, and it's like, oh, but at the same time, this is the job of the church. When Jordan or Kanye, people say, I want to be a Christian, the church needs to be there and say, come walk with us as we follow him. That's what we do.
Growing up in the evangelical church, hearing your pastor's take on it, I try to talk him out of it, is like heretical, right? Because the focus in sort of my experience of evangelicalism, and I forget the epoch that you called it, the sort of seeker movement.
The seeker movement.
That I see as an adult, and maybe again, I could be wrong about this, but the saving work, if I insert my brokenness into a conversion of someone else, it's bound to mess it up. And I actually believe in something that is big enough to do work outside of me. And if I insert myself, that's my selfishness and my pride and me wanting fame, money, house on a hill, all that stuff. That's me wanting that. And that's not actually not me wanting that person to experience Christ as the center focus of their life, and not to experience the glory that is God's creation and God's mission on earth and people, and how wonderful it is to be alive. And if I put myself in that situation, I inevitably screw it up. And once I figured that out, it became, a very difficult thing to not do that all the time, to not just, it just became very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to withhold, but also I see that withholding as an evidence of my faith. That is my personal evidence of faith, is that I trust rather than I'm trying. And I think for us, when we oftentimes will talk about, is Peterson a Christian? And for those of us who are Christians, there's this idea that you'd want him to be a part of your team. And that, again, is not why you would want Jordan Peterson to be a Christian if you actually are a Christian. That has a completely separate issue. And so what I think in this Kanye situation is I need to continually be refocused on being excited for another brother in Christ. And, we don't have any control out of it. We can speculate all we want. But again, as Pajot said, this is something to pay attention to.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, is that what you wanted to get off your chest? I'm so glad, because I'm going to, I'm going to be going out east, and it's like, I don't want to leave my channel dead. And it's like, I don't have a big amount of content to play while I'm gone. Well, now I got something else. So this is good.
I did want to push you a bit on the Jordan Rehab stuff. And also, this is important. This isn't, Thomas Kuhn in his writings about scientific paradigm shifts really talks about the transitionary states being not comfortable, being tumultuous, being chaotic. And this is it's the most tumultuous I've seen. Things are so up in the air and so bass-ackwards, as my grandma would say.
No, it's true. And, Trump and all of this stuff, we're in a period, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the 70s, and, Nixon resigning, and, bombings, the Weather Underground, racial, so, I was in Patterson, and, during the 70s as a kid. I graduated high school in 81. And in some ways it's different than the 70s, obviously, but there are echoes of the 70s in terms of relocation. And
because the 70s didn't have a style, did they?
The 70s?
They were a transitionary period between the 60s and between like the 80s, sort of prosperity stuff.
Yeah, it was a transitional period. It had its own style that, if you go back and you look at the clothes we wore in the late 70s, we don't want to wear those clothes again.
I saw a picture of me in a velour sweater that my mom had made. I saw this picture. It was from 1979 or something, and I was just like, "Mom, you're retired now. Could you please make me a velour sweater? Please, I'm gonna rock. I want some elbow patches too. I want some solid stuff."
You show up and lecture in class in that velour sweater and the elbow patches, and I love it. All right, James, this is wonderful. I'll probably post this sometimes next week or so when I'm gone.
Whenever you need to. And you can cut out that last part where we talked about Trump and velour sweaters.
No, that's the best part.
All right, bye.
All right, bye-bye.